Good morning. Thank you for taking the time to come on out and for the first, the maiden edition of Destiny Chants, the speaker series. And I just wanted to provide a little background concerning what the intention of this speaker series is about. Well, what we're trying to do with the speaker series is create an atmosphere that, with these conversations, create an atmosphere that instigates tipping points for members of the audience and all who hear and listen to the series. Now, I found a very interesting definition of what a tipping point is, and the best I saw was a tipping point is the critical point in a situation, a process, or a system beyond which a significant and often unstoppable effect or change takes place. So we want to be able to bring to all who hear or participate in this series tipping points that create for them or repeat for them in their own situations what our speaker has experienced by way of a tremendous business, overcoming challenges in the path to growing a significant operation. So I hope that you would visit the website, check out the series, and thank you for participating in this maiden edition. Let us welcome, the guest for the first edition, Andreas Currie.
Thank you.
Andrea, welcome.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this conversation because I know that you have done tons of stuff that should not be hidden in any closet.
Yeah.
So we want to bring that out and create inspiration for, create tipping points for those who hear us.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So I'm a professional geologist and have been doing geology for about over 20 years. And I'd been sort of in large organizations up until I had the opportunity to join a startup group in 2016. They had already had a successful exit previously. I think they had exited in 2015. So I was the only new one to the group, to the executive team. And so we successfully exited in 2021, and then did one more small one with an exit in 2023. So it was a pretty large jump from, a senior geologist role in a large organization to a tiny little startup with 6 people and, no assets. So yeah.
6 people and no asset.
Yeah. So I think the unique thing we did at the time was to just be completely self-funding for our first year. And so partly, investment in oil and gas was at an all-time low. So this 2016, Wall Street had kind of completely gone off investing in oil and gas because of, carbon footprints and that sort of thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And just the oil and gas industry in general had been rough. So
let's not go into all the details.
Okay,
yet.
Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself. So that's
Okay.
So we did self-fund for
what
a year.
are you doing now?
So now I've pivoted.
Because we know that you sold that business.
Yes.
So did you come from home and?
So I took a little break. So
Mm-hmm.
I took a break for about 4 or 5 months, and then had the opportunity to join the carbon sequestration group at Enbridge. So it's kind of been a neat pivot because it sort of utilizes all the skills that I had from before, and not just with subsurface characterization with the geology, but also sort of needing to be able to be creative mm-hmm. and pivot in an industry that's fairly new, and there's a lot of problem solving, and mm-hmm. kind of you're on this sort of a similar sort of roller coaster in some ways. Mm-hmm. So I've been doing that at Enbridge for the last year. Working on a project just north of Edmonton mm-hmm. To sequester carbon from cement plant. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back a bit, right?
Okay.
When well, we just trace a little bit of the history and see how things, really coalesced and began to roll for you. You got out of school, and then, so the reason I'm talking about you getting out of school is because, we have Andreas from the postgraduate students from one of the universities in town here, and we were supposed to drop a feed into their room, for this interview and all. So there are lots of people who are interested in how do I go from being a student in a university or a postgraduate student to being a founder and an executor of a successful business. So this path is very fascinating for lots of people. We hear typically that a successful operation would need a great idea. Yeah. But then an idea is like a nose, right? Everybody has one, but what differentiates one nose from another or one idea from another is, how you execute behind it, right? Yeah. Where is the courage that is going to move that idea out of your mind and out of your head into the marketplace, right?
Right.
And then I also understand that, you also would need a great team, so we're going to go use that model to examine what you did to bring all of these elements together in your own case to create this story.
Yeah,
right?
Okay. So I think the training that I had at the large corporations was really critical, and then all the exposure, because you're constantly evaluating other deals in small companies, and so I think those two were like critical pieces to get me prepared, basically. And then I think we had to sort of believe a different story about the play. For instance, the asset that we ended up purchasing. So, the previous company had drilled one well on there, and it was a sour gas well, so it was not producible. So now that had sort of sterilized the whole acreage. So we had developed a different theory about why that had occurred, and a different theory about why some of that other part of that acreage would be anomalously good. And so we did a ton of really good technical work to convince ourselves of that, and then we had to sort of step out and believe that the story was true, right? So you're never going to get the flashiest, shiniest asset. You're going to get the one that that has everybody's written off for whatever reason. So yeah, I think it takes courage, and then I think in that first year it took a lot of patience, because we went for over a full year evaluating asset after asset, and there was one that we basically started the company just in particular to get that asset, and then the entanglements were the asset was great, but it came with too much baggage, and so we had to walk away. So through that year, you do have moments where you're thinking how long do we go? Will we ever find the right fit? So I'd say as we get towards sort of that 1 year time scale, it started to be okay, are we going to find something, and how long will we be able to go until we do? So
let's back up a bit.
Yeah.
So you're saying that you joined this group who had successfully maybe started and sold an oil and gas business.
Yes.
And you got invited to participate in their next deal.
Yeah. And I didn't know any of them.
You didn't know any of them?
No. So, and the person who recommended me was not someone I'd ever worked with, but I think over the years I had developed a really good reputation and a lot of success at the larger companies that I'd been at. So it was sort of an old university friend, but we had never worked together. But that you can't underestimate your reputation and then also your network, because I think those two things were critical in me being invited into this next round. Yeah.
So your reputation, someone from the network, not someone you've been actively working with in your recent past.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gave your name to some group of strong operators.
Yeah.
And they invited you, hey, we want to do this next deal.
Yeah.
come and join
and
us.
I think
And-
our sector is like oil and gas in Calgary is quite small, right? So
Yes.
everybody knows everybody, and they will
To some degree,
they will
right.
hear of you multiple ways from multiple people. So yeah, I think
But
part is
all of this was happening at a time when the oil and gas sector was down, right?
Yes.
So macro for that industry was significantly
horrible.
It was
Yeah,
horrible.
it was terrible. Yeah.
Okay.
Like I would say, like there have been so many layoffs. I'd say
Uh-huh.
half of my friends that I graduated with from university were laid off. Like even moving from a very secure job where I had I've had lots of seniority to go do this and also take like a reduced salary for that year that we were self-funding was a felt like at the time a pretty big risk. But sometimes you get to the point where you're sort of like, you feel like you need to take that next step. Like not taking the shot felt like it would have been harder than taking it at that point. Like I think because I was feeling like I want to give it a try.
So you were living a secure job at a point when everybody was being laid off.
Yes.
You were not laid
Yes.
off. You stepped out of your comfort zone to
Exactly.
go do a startup.
And it was funny, I remember after that, because decisions after that got easier. Because once you've kind of taken a really big one, then it starts to kind of allow you to kind of be bolder after that, I found. So, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you did this very bold thing, left your job,
Yeah.
joined a startup.
Yeah.
So, and for 1 year, you guys didn't get any asset.
Right. Yeah. We were like renting offices by the individual office. You know, we were just looking at asset after asset. And we had talked to some private equity firms, but we did it very backwards. I would say fairly unusual in oil and gas. Normally you get your funding and then you start looking for your asset. We did it the other way around, where we found our asset and then, we'd talked to some people, but then we had really to rush to get to make this bid deadline, of course, that they had. And then Hurricane Harvey hit right as our plane was in the air to go to Houston. And so the whole deal had to be done when, everyone in Houston was up to their knees in water and boarding their houses up. But that did become the theme where, COVID, and you were kind of like, if there wasn't a crisis of some sort, then it just wasn't the norm, right? So yeah.
Yeah, they do say something about businesses that are born in the winter turn out to be great businesses.
Totally.
Businesses that start in the winter of the economic cycle usually are great businesses.
Yes.
But then they create comfortable people
Yeah.
who then break it up, and then
Yeah.
there's another winter. And,
Yeah.
So I guess
You get very resilient businesses.
Yes.
You get the opportunity to buy assets that you wouldn't otherwise be able. Assets are cheaper. Like I found we could get staff, because some really good people have been laid off, so I could get like 3-day-a-week staff, for instance. I never would have been able to do that at a normal time. We were super cheap office space. There was lots of things and I think you do make a very resilient group. Like I just saw a chart this week that was like, now for the assets, Montney, like all the really popular assets in Canada, you're starting to have to pay more and more and more for these assets. So yeah, I think those headwinds can be a good opportunity as well.
right, it can be a good opportunity when you have dry powder.
Yes.
That's talking about liquidity, right?
Yes.
The reason you have a season like that is
Yes.
because liquidity dries up, right?
Exactly.
So in the face of a very disfavorable time
Yeah.
for the oil and gas industry
Yeah.
in Wall Street,
Yeah.
I mean, capital allocators were disallocating monies to that
Yes.
industry.
Yeah.
And you were about to deploy a startup in that space. So how did you navigate? How did you come about even getting those calls,
Yeah.
getting those doors
Well,
open to you?
I think there was a huge advantage in their previous exit, right? Because once you've had one, people will generally, and I think if it would have been any other time, we would have a lot more to choose from. So, we had, I think probably we had to take maybe more conditions that we didn't particularly love, right? You have to get, and then we also, even to get the deal with the company that we were buying the asset from, we had to get pretty creative on that deal too. And that actually became a theme through that company, because we did, I think one of the reasons for our success is we did a lot of very creative deals with companies who generally, like very, very large companies who generally did not do deals on any of that stuff. And so, we got really strong relationship building, and then also just really super creative things like overrides and stuff like that. Just super creative things to sort of, and then I think we haven't talked about this yet, but we were kind of like technically leading edge as far as, we were doing record-setting amount of sliding sleeves, as anyone in the industry, fracking, and 100% water recycling. So we were doing technical things that other companies wanted to learn from and get the data from. So that also, I think, provided us some leverage. It was like, hey, partner up with us on this, and then you'll get the information on this. And there was a ton of value in that as well.
So I guess that speaks to the second factor of starting a business. I mean, like have a great idea, and then do it differently.
Yes.
So you're saying that the difference that your team was deploying to the market was cutting-edge technology.
Exactly.
Apart from a track record.
Yes.
A positive track record.
Yes.
But you did have a good technology that the industry was hungry for.
Exactly.
Right?
Like we kind of believed that we could have more successful, like people were not doing the intensity of completions that were required for that formation. And then even water recycling, I think actually became quite a big thing too, because other large companies were just not doing that. And then when we exited, that was like a pretty attractive to have sort of an ESG component of the deal as well. So, yeah.
So are you able to share some of the creativity that you guys, anyone, maybe?
Like on the deal side?
On the deal side, in getting the bigger, the larger owners to work with you and sell you an asset that makes sense.
Yeah. I think like there was, like land kind of comes close to expiry, so you can kind of go, hey, we will help you keep your land by drilling a well either right beside you or in your land. So, and that's very commonly done. I think the overrides was probably really unique because it was like, don't worry, you're not going to give up too much. You're still, if we get a good well, I always say a deal should feel really good on both. Like it should be mutually beneficial. And I think there was also became that level of trust. Like our technical teams worked together really well. We sort of were really proactive in sharing information, so they didn't have to come asking for it. Could we also use some of their technical expertise? So really making it feel like it was a full partnership. Because sometimes you can do these, like especially big companies, they don't want to not be the operator of the well, and so that they really don't want to. But we also had developed, I think, a really good reputation as an operator in that area. So I think combining all of those things is sort of what made it successful.
Was luck did it feature
luck
in it?
Always does. No one wants to say that, but it really is
Tell
true,
me
right?
about luck.
Yeah. Well, I think like on our third company, we had a completely sort of new play. And then we were thinking that maybe the time was right to start going up for sale, but we weren't quite there yet. But then one of our competitors, quite far south, had drilled a well into that same thing, and none of the information was released, but we kind of had a good idea that they didn't want anyone, like that it was going to be good. So then it was kind of like, you didn't think the timing was now, but now the timing, like now it is the time, and so then you hustle, right? So that's luck too, like completely luck, right? That you can just kind of go, okay, I just noticed that, noticed that little dot on the map further south, and so it's that sometimes it's that kind of luck too. And I think knowing when to exit is a really important skill, and it's a really hard thing because it's easy to want to hang on, I think, too long. I think that's probably I think the timing is really tough, and being able to sort of like know when to let go. And then I think the other thing, and because I've evaluated many, little startup assets, I think also it's easy, like in our industry, to kind of keep doing the safe thing. You've drilled one well, it worked here, it might be sour down there, but you don't really want to go do that because it's really risky. But, I think staying in one spot, like stepping out and proving the whole thing, even though you'd be making a lot more cash flow if you were staying in the same spot, I think that's critical. And then I think when we were looking at assets, we were really clear that we wanted to be able to have free cash flow. I think, I believe it was like in 3 years. So it had to be a fairly quick turnaround and pretty aggressive. But we were pretty confident that we needed to be free cash flow or very close to by the time we wanted to exit too.
So you kept the asset for 3 years?
Let me think here. No, it was longer than that. So it ended up being longer, of course. But yeah, I think it ended up like from 2016 till 2021 or something. So more like 5.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And then you talk about timing the exit. And how time really factors strongly into luck, right?
Yeah. And then there's all the unknowns in there, right?
Yeah.
You have COVID. Gas prices go so low that you are now, even though lots of it's hedged, you're still paying to get rid of some of your stuff. And so you're kind of riding all this. But I think there's going to always be stuff that comes up that is not was not planned, right? So.
Yeah. So when, and I know that we will come back and talk about the team because the team is so important when it comes to, executing and operating anything successfully, right? So we'll come back in a bit to the team dynamics. Yeah. Right? I want to talk a bit about, choosing the exit, right? Because there are times when multiples just compress, right? And you don't know ahead of time, are you going to get 2x, 3x, or
you don't know.
What multiple will you get for your whatever index you're using, EBITDA or whatever, right? And then there are times when the market the macros are great and multiples are expanding and you really will attract huge valuation. What was your experience with that?
It was kind of like we got the call during Christmas holidays and all of a sudden like private equity guys wanted you for sale on the first Monday after Christmas holidays, kind of like it was like immediately. So I think it was just sort of like a number of sort of quiet inbounds made them kind of go, okay, some of these big guys are interested for whatever reason right now. So that I think that was the biggest thing. Then now is the time to go. And we had drilled a number of wells that hadn't come on yet. So like, it was kind of like, maybe we should wait a little bit longer. And I think we were close to free cash flowing, but not quite. But I think it was those inbounds that sort of pushed us over the edge. And you don't want to lose that kind of, you don't want to lose those.
That's a good moment, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And so looking back, would you say it was a great time?
It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. I think most people who have done startups would probably say the same thing. Like it's like a roller coaster, and I think like most of the personalities that go into this like enjoy it most of the time. But the lows were pretty low. We had some technical failures that were not our fault, but really could have ended the whole thing before we'd gotten very far. We had a well come in sour, which money-wise was huge. It's one of the, I think...
How huge was that money-wise?
I don't know, by the end of it, it was probably over $10 million. It was a lot. And then, and you've now kind of also sterilized a big part of your acreage, right? So there was that. Then even just, first of all, we were in a play that requires a lot of capital and has a high risk. The wells are very expensive if you're drilling pad wells, so you can easily be into the 10s, 20s, 30s, millions just on individual pads. And then sometimes while you're drilling, you lose a well. And so, but then we saw that our competitor put out in their corporate presentation that they were losing 1 in every 6. So we were like, okay, well, we're not doing so bad, but it's painful when it's your own money, and it's painful when you don't have, unlimited deep pockets. So I think like it took a lot of courage to be in a play that was pretty high risk and also just very expensive to develop. So, yeah.
So I wanted to just like lean in a bit more
Yeah.
about, because now you've talked about some of the challenges,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You had a breakthrough in identifying an asset.
Yes.
Just by seeing a dot on.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was your brilliance. I mean, as the as the G&G lady in the group, right? You
Yeah.
were the one.
Yeah.
So when you had the bad experience,
Yeah.
was that your fault?
Oh, no. But
Okay.
yeah.
Right, because this ties into the dynamics, right?
Yes.
Amongst the team, the
Yeah.
personality mix and all of that.
Yeah.
And leadership and management styles.
Those
right?
things can be good for you they can be good for your group, right? Because it's easy to get too cocky. I mean, we became very careful about our drilling, our operations, everything. Like, we didn't take anything for granted after that. And so I think even though it was terribly painful at the time, I think it did help make a team that, and then also you've kind of had to navigate out of some really bad situations. And so you've kind of got people with that grit to go, okay, this looks really bad. How can we mitigate this? How can we pivot? So you're, again, it kind of builds resilience. I would not want to do it again like that, but you never choose those things, but they do sort of like grow you as a team, I think. And yeah, I think some good did come out of those things for sure.
Yeah, of course, right?
Yeah.
So when your group reached out to you at the beginning of all of this, and they say, hey, Andrea, we want to work on this and we want you to join the team.
Yeah.
How did you process that?
Yeah.
How did you process? I know, yes, you wanted a startup, maybe,
Yeah.
but how did you process that this is a good team to go throw in your hat?
Yeah.
Because you were living a paid job.
Yeah.
And it was bad times, economically and for firms. How did you process, would I be able to work successfully with this team?
Yeah.
Or was that not even a consideration for you?
It was a consideration because you are like working really closely in pretty stressful situations for a potentially really long time. Because that's the other thing in startups. It's not like you can leave if you don't like it. You're very stuck in it together, right? So those personality things are really critical. I think knowing that they had a really great exit previously to me I probably wouldn't have gone with a team of people I didn't know if they hadn't have had that. And then I met with each of them almost sort of individually. And then I was still undecided. So then I remember they offered to like, okay, meet with another one of the guys. So, and then, I just, again, this industry is fairly small. So you sort of ask around and then you just sort of go for it. So, yeah.
So there was no, I know some people do what they call personality fit analysis.
No.
So you just trusted your gut.
Yes. Yeah. And wasn't always perfect, right? Personality-wise, but yeah.
Were you the only female in your group?
Yes. Yeah. At the time. But I mean, often in oil and gas, you're kind of used to that anyway.
Yeah.
And then, although, like, I would say in like private equity startups, there it was very clear that like I think I could probably, that on the technical teams, on the technical executive side, I don't know that there was hardly any females that I met with over the years. So, but yeah, it was something I was already very used to, completely felt normal. Yeah.
So how did, when the time came, in fact, before we get there, in the course of going through the journey of, developing that, did you have any experience where you were spending endless hours at work just grinding, or what would you say is the most difficult part of operating, starting, and executing around a startup?
That's a good question. I mean, I think when you're in the beginning, your geologist is doing a ton of the work because you're having to do technical and those technical evaluations. It all kind of comes to you at the beginning, and then not knowing if you're being too pessimistic, if you're the reason that you're not getting anything because you're not seeing it optimistically enough. Like, your job is to sort of be hard on these assets because you want to make sure that you can make money when you get them, but you also have to be able to see the opportunities there, right? So, I think that first year was really tough that way because you're not sure, if you're gonna get anything, and if you're being too hard on these things, and if your technical evaluations are correct. And then I think, some of the technical challenges and keeping your costs down, all that stuff, I think was like really difficult. So I would say those two things.
This is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Would you want to do this again?
$1 million question, hey? I think once I had done those two, I was really like, I could feel that I was like, I need a break. And I think never say never. I'm like really enjoying this pivot to carbon capture and kind of all the learnings that are coming with that. Never say never, but who knows? There's
What did you find to be? What was your experience working with a private equity partner? Because the culture in private equity, is different.
It's different.
It's different.
Yeah.
I know there are a few private equity guys in the room here. It's a different culture,
It
right?
is a different culture.
So what was your experience?
And it was
that?
very new to me.
It was new to you. Okay.
One thing about our private equity funders, they had a really big, very strong technical team. So it almost became like a full extension. Like, I was often the only geologist, or wasn't like I had much technical help on the technical side. So having that was really great. And I was actually quite surprised by how much technical rigor they wanted and by the questions they would ask. So I think I was like surprised by that, but it was great for us because you had to have your technical really solid for this group. And then negotiating with them was tricky, right? And again, I think you had to get really creative and be very patient and sort of compromise a lot. So that was a big learning, I think, just sort of understanding. I mean, the other guys, of course, had experience. Well, I think they were actually public in the company before us. But just kind of like learning to navigate how that looked was tricky for sure. Yeah.
So what did you find that they were excessively demanding, or or that, because it's both, there's also a psychological component to it, right?
Yes.
If you always have to be the one that says, okay, I yield.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I yield.
Yeah.
Even if you thought you had maybe superior judgment or argument in some cases.
Yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, I mean, they first of all sort of stuck by us when we had that technical thing, and not all groups would have.
No.
Right?
No.
So you don't take that for granted.
Yeah.
And then, like.
Were you the only oil and gas?
We were their only
India
Canadian.
asset.
No,
Okay.
Like they have a
portfolio.
huge portfolio of companies, but we were their only Canadian asset. And so, I'm trying to think. Yeah, can you like expand on the question?
I was interested in learning that, because if when you said you had to be creative in working with them, and then you had to compromise a lot, you know, and I was wanting to have us understand, you know, what the dynamics underneath all of that was like, you know, and how did it come about? What effect did it have, you know, psychologically on you? What effect did it have, you know, in forging or transforming your leadership style? You know, what did you take away from the experience of that?
I think
interaction.
I think, and sometimes you think you're going to have a little more say than you do, right? Because they've put a number of people on your board, and so sometimes. And then I think like hedging was a good example where we did not want to hedge at the number that they had set out, and that was one thing where it was just like you pretty much have to kind of hedge when they say hedge. So you know, and so there's some things that you can compromise on, and then there are some things that you can't, and then I'd say kind of like the final exiting was tricky. So I think I always say like we should take more sort of human psychology courses for anyone at university, because I think it's really like critical to understand how people are thinking and what everybody wants in kind of eventually coming to that answer. And I do think, like, from what I've heard, I think the US private equity companies are different than the Canadian ones. So yeah, there was some things that I think we probably had to compromise more than we would have liked, but that's sort of, and again, that's part of getting capital when there's no capital available, right? So yeah, I think it just becomes part of the deal.
Yeah, and then again, of course, it's always important to know that when you get money from private equity, they come into the deal being sure about how they're going to get out of it.
Exactly. Of course, right?
They come in having strategized and formulated their way to where is the exit in this operation. Whereas you, as an entrepreneur, you know, you are going to build it, you're going to develop strategies, you're going to keep expanding it, you know. So there is that, right? You are not looking for exit. You came in so that you can grow a phenomenal, large, you know, strong entity. But they came in just so they can. They're passing through. And they want to pass through successfully.
Exactly.
You know.
And so they'll also sort of like guide you when you might hang on too long, or when you might, right? They've done this before. Right? So, and sometimes you have to go, they're seeing a lot more than I am. They've done this a lot. So you got to use those expertise too, right? So,
exactly. Because that kind of mentality, you know, just following the math. Where is the math? Where does the math lead to? Where is it cutting through? You know, it's very methodical, it's very mathematical, right?
Yes.
You know, it's not an art.
and we get emotional, right? Because this is our project, this is our company. Like, I'd say, especially with our last, you know, we were sort of intertwined. Our third company was sort of intertwined with our first, because we were sort of funded by the shares of the purchase of the previous company. And so I really believed in this play, but we couldn't really fund it the way we needed to. So I had to like hand it over. It was kind of like handing over your baby before you're ready to do it. But if you just aren't equipped to do it the way you need to, and you also just need to accept that this is as far as you can take. You know, it's time to let it go, kind of thing. So yeah, and I think that was one of the challenges we had too, where we were sort of, you know, funded by the shares of Whitecap who had bought us, and then we didn't have any control of what price those shares would get sold. So that was frustrating, because, you know, private equity had their idea of what they wanted, and we just, I think, wanted to make sure that we got out with something. So and like oil and gas price was very rocky during that period. So that part I think was tricky, but you know, it worked out and we navigated it. And again, required a lot of patience. So yeah. Yeah.
So oil prices tend to be rocky a lot.
Yeah.
You know, which is very interesting that that's one of the most I mean, someone said oil and gas, if you do it right, you will come out on top.
Really?
Oh, you don't agree?
Well, no, I was talking to somebody from capital markets the other day, and he was like, man, someone's got to put to like list together of how many actually exit successfully on small. So he and I would agree, you just don't hear about them, I think, right? We hear about the successes, but we don't hear about the failures. So he's like, I don't think anyone's really put that together, but it would be, I don't know that that's the case. I think it's a pretty difficult.
How successful was your exit?
So on like a total, like I'm actually not totally sure, because like they ended up selling the share. We personally exited before they sold the shares, but you know they had rolled up those shares at least double. So it was like it did, you know, hanging on to those did actually really help and worked out really well. So yeah. But I don't know what the final number ended up being.
It's not public, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So when you went into that experience,
yeah,
versus now, you know, how would you describe your personal leadership style?
Yeah, like you kind of feel like you're a different person when you come out the other side, right? Like I think like I learned a lot from the other guys. Like, you know, we had one guy who was very careful and very strategic, whereas I usually just come out and say what I I'm very direct. I say what I think. And so just learning from him, especially that sort of like quiet, patient, strategic, you know, really thoughtful, slow down, I think for me was the biggest thing. Like, I think just being a little more constrained as far as that stuff went, I think. And yeah, I think you sort of, do you come out of there more cynical or more, I think maybe so, right? Where you're like, you know more of what can go wrong than you did when you started, right? So yeah, I think those are the main things.
That would tend to sober you up and cause you to be more constrained.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So before we move to the other side and talk about, you know, all the interesting stuff we are doing right now, because that is a very interesting conversation to be had, right? What would you say to a young person listening, right?
Yeah.
Who maybe is a Googler or maybe is doing a postgraduate degree or a graduate degree and it's like burning to get in the field and say, hey, I want to start something.
Yeah.
Because the age to start a business, succeed in it, and exit with phenomenal success continues to just come down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Every day we see, you know, in the tech space.
Totally.
There are amazing successes.
Yeah.
22-year-olds, 25-year-olds. That have built phenomenal businesses, right?
Yeah.
So what would you say, you know, would be your own suggestions regarding here's how to look at for what, and here's how to combine it, and
like I think your ability to kind of grind at that age is big. So I think go do that, right? Like for me, obviously, like I think spending all that time in like companies that were offering really good training was really helpful. So if you can do that even for a couple of years, I don't think in our industry the training's not nearly as good as it used to be because there's just less capital for that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's like building that network is huge. Building that reputation and that network is huge. Like I was talking with a junior the other day, and she had started when her company was completely remote too, right? And I think you need to get FaceTime with people as much as possible, because she was just saying like it was so challenging because when you're young and you're not getting the FaceTime with all the higher ups at your company, with all the various stakeholders, like it's just not the same. So yeah, I think it's those like building the reputation, building the network, and then grinding really hard when you have the time to do it, right? Yeah, and the energy. So, yeah.
At any point in time, Andrea has like almost 4 startup ideas in her head. The times I sit to talk with her, I mean, like, the way she bubbles over with this blah, 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 and when she's telling you about the startup idea, she's not just describing a nose and a face. She, as it were, she's identified the market. She's tracked down, the pay. And I am like, come on, girl. Let's go recruit some teams around your thinking. So, I thought that, Andrea, if you tell us a little bit, just talk about the exciting stuff about what you're doing right now.
Okay.
And then let's take just one startup idea that you have in your head.
Okay.
And let's all walk through, let's do a small case study and see how we can, activate that and, see where that goes.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good.
So tell us what you're doing right now.
So yeah, I was kind of like not sure what I wanted to do next, and then I kind of got this opportunity with an old colleague that I used to work with to come on and do carbon capture and subsurface characterization for that at Enbridge. So, and it's just a really, really fun, really solid technical team, and then it's also just really, it's kind of an emerging industry, and it's sort of fun for my sort of personality to be part of that, because you're sort of part of building it. Like, we're, one of the big parts of carbon capture is just being able to monitor that CO2 plume once you're injecting, and so a big piece of that is the measurement, monitoring, and verification. And so, sort of trying new technologies to try and prove that you can effectively monitor without spending the crazy dollars that they thought, that were originally thought to be needed here. So we've tried numerous things that, we'll be writing papers on, and that, haven't been tried in this particular way before. So it's really fun, sort of like, it's really fun to be part of sort of building that and building up that knowledge base for all of the other projects and for the industry in general. So yeah, it's been kind of fun.
So when it comes to carbon capture, right, that increasingly is a very important conversation to have, because the social, if this oil and gas has such a huge social deficit, because of the pollution, right?
Yeah.
So this is supposed to be the remedy, right?
Right, and it's not just oil and gas. So, like in our case, it's cement. It'll be
cement, of
power
course.
generation, chemical processing. There's
so you
data centers is starting to become
data
a big
centers,
one, right?
Of course.
So
farms.
the problem is we're actually keep using more and more energy, not going down. I think, and it's been really interesting because even with the politics, in the States, that carbon capture, we've noticed, we thought there'd be a major slowdown. There has been a bit, but those projects are still getting approved within the last few months in the States. So carbon capture is not going away. And with things like data centers, our need for it is actually only going up. Yeah.
So I'm trying to see what the economics around carbon capture is, right?
Yeah.
Because if it's about cost control, right, and pollution capture, well, that's just mitigating downsides, right?
Yeah.
But what is the true economics for the carbon capture?
Yeah. Well, I think if you create like a stable carbon pricing and a carbon market, which those things can be traded, then you can start to have it become an industry that that is attractive. And so and they are like huge dollars for capital, but then there's also, you have to balance that against the cost of polluting as well, right?
Yes.
So I think some of that is still getting hashed out, and then of course, you're always sort of like waiting to see which government you're going to have and how they're going to deal with that. So we do still need to kind of like have, I think a lot of big projects are sort of waiting on that stable carbon, the guaranteed carbon pricing, so that they can kind of move forward with confidence. Because really what everyone needs is stability, right?
Yeah,
So,
right.
yeah.
So carbon capture, the conversation around carbon capture is a big part of the ESG umbrella, right?
Yeah.
And I know from previous reports that the COP, right?
Yeah.
COP
Yeah.
that you guys
Yeah.
do every year,
Yeah.
you know, they're not particularly impressed
Yeah.
by how industries continue to capture,
Yeah.
and then they go to emerging markets to buy
Right.
to
Yes.
buy credits.
Yes.
They're like, oh, don't worry, we'll buy credits.
Right.
Do what you got to do,
Yeah.
and then we'll go buy
Yeah.
credits. You know.
Yeah.
So how is what you're doing trying to? What would be the outcome regarding
Yeah.
that? Because
Yeah.
if all the farms and all the data centers just continue to expand.
Yeah.
You know, we even put some up in
Yeah.
the satellites up and put some data centers up there.
Yeah.
You know, and then we're talking about carbon capture. There really will not be. We will not get to anywhere.
We're not
close.
reducing our consumption.
No,
We're just
We're just window dressing it.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that is tricky, right? Because, and I think like, you know, for our like. We are responsible for the carbon sequestration, but then we are our client, for instance, is a cement plant, and cement will always be carbon intensive, no matter. It's not like you can replace it with something else.
No.
It is just carbon intensive. So I think that's a great example of something that really makes good sense for carbon capture because there's not an alternative. You can't replace it with solar or something like that,
No,
right?
you cannot.
So yeah, I think it is a tricky balance, and I think stable carbon pricing will help with that kind of thing, and then, you know, sort of making it easier to get these projects over the finish line. Have companies having confidence that, you know, that they, and then maybe having rules about how these, you know, these credits get traded, and making sure that, you know, it's equitable. Yeah.
Okay. So give us a startup idea.
Okay, so well, one I think being at a large company again has been interesting because so I have a lot of like semi-retired contractors who would sort of do me favors and come in, and super good people who are really skilled, but it's very hard at a large company because you can't just bring people in. They have to do, you know, 2 weeks of onboarding, and you don't have an AFE for it, and like onboarding actually someone who has a separate company can take a crazy amount of time. So, you know, I was thinking like it would be really interesting to tap into the sort of like highly skilled but sort of semi-retired market, give them like an app where they can say their availability, and then be able to sort of like already be pre-onboarded with some of these big companies, so that, you know, it's kind of like a teacher sub list, but not quite. So like I think, especially in our industry, we didn't train young people for a long time because of the downturn, and so we're sort of losing some of the really skilled people. So yeah, I've sort of like love that idea of sort of like, you know, letting the semi-retired work in the middle of winter and then go do their So yeah.
Well, we're pretty much out of time now. And Andrea, you've been a fantastic speaker. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please, can we give her our appreciation? Thank you.
Thanks.